Welcome to the Restitutor Orbis channel, and thank you for joining me for our first exploration outside of the United States. We are headed to New Zealand to explore Old World Wellington. For a little for a little context here, though, we're going to ascertain exactly where New Zealand and Wellington is located. Not to insult anyone's intelligence, but it's always good to help us reference where we supposedly are. I'm not exactly sure why there's this strange circular view on the map. I mean, ultimately, it's a two-dimensional map, and when you look at it on your flat screen, whatever device you're using, it's going to be depicted as a two-dimensional map. But regardless, New Zealand is very rimward, very, very southern located nation, such as Chile and Argentina. They're the closest nations located to Antarctica. And as we zoom in, we see where New Zealand is located. One quick note, though, I've come across some individuals who claim that they remembered New Zealand being located a little more hubward, north, vicinity where New Caledonia and Fiji are to an extent. Now, I don't recall this, but it's an interesting contrast to think about. In any event, we zoom in on New Zealand, and we see where Wellington is located, which is our exploration today. Port City, and we're going to be examining it very closely and getting an idea about what its old world history could be. Interesting thing about Wellington, it's much like exploring a little bit further west in the United States, where you have much less of a historical narrative to go off of. So let's take a look at the chronology and the timeline of the settlement of Wellington in New Zealand. And it should be worth noting that Wellington is the capital city of New Zealand, the political capital, if you're not aware of that. And we'll see how that plays into the history as well. So we're going to take a look at the timeline of Wellington from the New Zealand government website itself. It should be worth noting that Wellington was originally settled in 22nd January 1840. So back in 1840 was when the first European settlers arrived in Wellington. And I certainly don't want to gloss over the story of the Maori, the indigenous people of New Zealand. And clearly they had been there for some time and have a very interesting account about how their distant ancestors had sailed all over the Pacific. It's quite an interesting account, and I recall hearing it when I went to Hawaii as well about Polynesians that had sailed all across the Pacific. And I wonder about the veracity of that. And I'm certainly not going to rely on any mainstream accounts to tell us exactly what happened in Maori history any more than I am for Native American history. I'm not saying that they're lying, I'm just saying I do not trust their veracity. In any event, according to the mainstream account, settlers in 1840, and just 4 months later they've got the newspaper going. Well, what else are people going to do if they don't have a newspaper? How many people was that newspaper being produced for, I wonder? Oh, well, no matter. And, in 1843, you need to get the purpose-built theater. Got to have entertainment. So a paper to read and a theater. They're right at it. Pistols at dawn. So it seems as though ruffian U.S. naval officers weren't the only ones who were dueling back in the 19th century. Intriguing. Massive earthquake hits southern North Island. 8.2. I wonder how they measured the magnitude of that so precisely. Of course, I always wondered that for the San Francisco earthquake, too. And that was in 1855. In 1865, Parliament moves to Wellington. The capital moved from Auckland to more centrally located Wellington. So 1865 is when Wellington became the national capital of New Zealand. Intriguing. Now that's interesting as well. August 1878, Wellington steam tram service opened. So they were really moving along there. Oh, and they got the rugby team in action in 1884. Rugby being very big in New Zealand, Australia, and parts of Europe. Although some people say it's not quite as big as soccer or football, as they call it over there. Foundation stone for Victoria University's first building laid in 1904. Racist killing in Wellington's Haining Street. So, again, looks like that wasn't just going on in the United States either, if we go off the official historical account. Public Trust Office Building opens in 1909, and we'll be taking a closer look. That is a very interesting building that warrants our exploration. Battle of Featherston Street. Most violent street fighting of the 1913 Great Strike. So it looks like they had some labor issues down in New Zealand too. Main body of the New Zealand Expeditionary Force sails to war. That was part of the Anzac Force, Australian and New Zealand Army contingents that participated in the Battle of Gallipoli. There was a great movie of that, which just happens to feature Mel Gibson and a couple of the great actors from down there. First Rotary Club in New Zealand, founded in 1921. Baby farmer Daniel Cooper hanged. The generation after the hanging of the infamous Minnie Dean, the murder trial of Daniel and Martha Cooper revealed that baby farming and illegal abortion were still regarded as solutions to the problem of unwanted children in New Zealand. Intriguing, isn't it? Baby farming. So, in other words, collecting children and then taking them to people who actually want them. That doesn't sound anything like the orphan trains, does it? No, not at all. Not at all. Welfare plan gets baptism of fire. Yes, so they were suffering from the Great Depression in late 1930s, and they had a welfare plan. Interesting. New Zealand Centennial Exhibition opens. More than 2.6 million people visited the New Zealand Centennial Exhibition. So, many interesting things drawing our attention. And keep in mind that was all within 100 years. Well, let's take a closer look at Wellington, the city now. So, of course, we have our standard drawing, rendering picture for what Wellington looked like during initial settlement, which we just saw in the timeline was 1840, at least that's what we're told that it was. We think about the compressed timeline that New Zealand is under and Wellington itself, and it reminds us of many of the cities that we've looked at in the western United States. We think of places such as Salt Lake City and Los Angeles that were supposedly settled later, or San Francisco with the 49ers and the gold rush. It's really about that exact same time frame, and it's almost as though we're seeing a replay of that schematic for how they could potentially weave this historical account. What's interesting is that there were accounts of many conflicts with the Maori warriors in New Zealand, and we talked about that when we reviewed conflicts on Saturday with the video trying to determine the potential of a reset war that was occurring across all the lands. So if a reset war had been finished at that point in time, or they were still in the midst of it, then it was clear that a settlement, or new explorers, settlers, had to be put into Wellington to make sure that all the lands were indeed occupied. It seems as though part of the plan was that all the habitable lands had to be occupied, and some were occupied a lot faster than others. We're not exactly sure on the timeline, but the reason Wellington is so interesting is that it's on a much more compressed timeline from the historical account that we're given. Think about this. We're told that 1840 the very first settlers were arriving. This city's not even been around for 200 years. So that's a very compressed timeline, especially for some of these images that we're going to be looking at and some of these buildings and structures that we're going to be looking at. There's a lot of mysteries with them if we're going to try to make them fit with the historical timeline that we're given. And the reality is there's actually a lot of anomalies that step up in Wellington. Safe to say that New Zealand is a very beautiful area, and what we'll see, though, defies simple explanation. And we'll also get the impression, though, that we really are in the we're in the southern reaches of the world, so far away from other civilization, and perhaps that was true for the previous civilization. This is a picture that we have that's ostensibly from the 1880s in Wellington, and this is what you'd expect to see, a couple wooden houses, but although it looks like that house in the background there looks a little bit more built up. Looks like we have some mud, a couple trees, and two individuals that are just hanging out doing who knows what. This is another one of those photos that you really have to question the veracity of, and the reason I display it is this is typically the photo they'll show us to try to give us an idea of what things were really like there. Of course, I always wonder myself what it actually means and what it's really showing at that time. Here we have Our Lady's Home of Compassion's building, whatever purpose it served, whether this was some sort of relief center or assistance to those that needed it. Perhaps it was another building of the friendless like we've seen in some eastern U.S. cities. Very interesting that we see that it seems to be built on mud, and there's little else around it. It's images like this that really cause us to ask many questions. The exact date on this photo, there were conflicting accounts. I had 1880, and then I also came up with 1897, so I'm not sure. If somebody has a better idea, let me know. Older photo, though, and very interesting when we consider the foundation of Wellington. The founded foundation, if you know what I mean. And now we look at the Parliament House for Wellington. And this is where Parliament meets as part of its duties as the federal capital of New Zealand. Very beautiful building and the classic old worlder. This was built from 1914 to 1922, so they say it took them 8 years, so I suppose that's somewhat credible. The Beehive building on the right is the lovely modern building that was started in the 60s and finished later, and that's apparently where the executive chamber is for the government of New Zealand, so make of that what you will. But of course, looking at this building a little more closely, and we see some of the hallmarks that it seems to be a building that goes much deeper than first indications would allow us to realize. And of course, we see the different types of stone, and yet we still have the classic hallmarks of what we see in many government buildings that we've looked at before, with the columns and many of the smaller pediments above each of the windows. A lot of beautiful and ornate detail in this image. Of course, once again, I'm left questioning, how deep does this building's foundation really go? What's really under there? And what exactly caused this? We know we have an earthquake in New Zealand's past. Of course, we'll be told this building was constructed well after that earthquake. But it does bring up many more questions on the matter. And then looking over at this building here, and we see that this is no slouch either, with some of the beautiful windows as well. So I wonder what's the true story behind these buildings in this government section of Wellington, and why was Wellington suddenly designated to be the federal capital? Of course, we'll be told it's for geographic location, although there's a variety of conflicting accounts on that as well. Here's another view of the Parliament House, and we're seeing the Beehive and contrasting the old world construction with the new world construction. Well, I always enjoyed this, especially when it really gives you the idea of how much difference there is. Now, according to the historical account, we're told that one was built from 14 to 22, and the other one was built in the late 1960s. Really? I don't know. It seems like there's a lot more than just a few decades between these two buildings, and this is quite a stark contrast that really stands out. Well, I mean, I've got to give them credit. At least they were willing to put a building like that right next to Parliament House, but it just brings up more questions. And now the National War Memorial, and this is for the fallen of the World Wars for New Zealand. And they've got a very beautiful memorial here as well. Sort of a unique obelisk with a very well-developed base, and look at some of those very large stones. The war memorials are always interesting because we always ask the question, are they really from our civilization, or is it just something we found and repurposed? Because we always see an old world connotation to them. And this is certainly no exception to the ones that we looked at across the United States. We see that there's an ornate beauty and detail in it, and it's certainly not something that we would see modern war veterans have dedicated in their honor. I don't know if it's the case in New Zealand. However, looking on the inside of it, and you see just utterly beautiful internal construction with the massive pillars and the beautiful floor, and looking at the proper respect being given to the veterans of the World Wars. And it should be noted that I always appreciate respect being given to veterans. I have a lot of personal respect for veterans, regardless of what nation they come from. I'm aware of some of the hardships that they face. Yet at the same time, imagine finding a building like this and wondering what its purpose is, and wondering if this is merely something that's designed to continue to perpetuate the reason why many of these conflicts occur. And that's something I've given a lot more thought to. And now we go to the wondrous old public trust building. And this was supposedly constructed in 1909. And you see that this is a very beautiful building, and there's a definite unique look to it. And this is one that really stands out. And I think the reason for that is you've got the dome on the top of it, but then you've got some, what appears to be some unique architecture with the larger blocks. And I'll admit, I haven't quite seen a building like this. We do see a little bit of a smaller scale overall in New Zealand, but we certainly don't see any difference in the beauty and the detail in the construction. And I think that's telling given New Zealand's relative position in the lands. And this building is still standing today. You can go visit it, and it's retained all of its great beauty. And again, I think that's a great testament to the original construction techniques used in this building. And this is something else that I wonder what the foundation is truly like, and how potentially deep this building does go underground. And I wonder if there's an account of some sort of underground tunnel system, as there always seems to be with these old world buildings. And any residents of Wellington are certainly welcome to let me know in the comments if you're aware of a tunnel system, whether it's with the Parliament House or here with this very beautiful building. 1909. Again, a compressed timeline. It's as though they just threw up Wellington in a very short amount of time. Here's a side view of that same building, and there you can see some more of the gorgeous detail. But we've seen this before, especially with the base block construction. We've seen that in many government buildings across cities that we've seen in the United States. And then we have the columns, although they look a little bit sectional. I love the detail around each and every one of the windows. And again, you see the scaling with the columns around the other windows. Just gorgeous. So the same themes and what appears to be the same construction techniques being used all the way down here in New Zealand. Yet there's aspects of it that seem similar to what we've already looked at in other old world buildings. Very, very intriguing. And now we go to the Wellington railway station, and this is a 1936 picture, supposedly. And yet, while we see an old world building underneath the scaffolding, I'm seriously questioning if this is an actual construction photo or if this is merely a clean and renovate photo. I mean, you think about it, you find an incredible building like this, and it's probably conveniently already located near, let's just say, some existing infrastructure, and you just decide to get it back in service and operation. This is probably what it would look like. Of course, there'll be no construction photos of the foundation of this building, and I can't imagine why. And now we look at the old Parliament House, and this is something that was in service from 1871 to 1907. Who knows when it was originally built. Very gorgeous and beautiful building. And of course, we go off of the historical account that we were given. We're told that the federal government did not move to Wellington until well into the 1860s. So, very interesting juxtaposition of accounts. Beautiful building with some of the windows and the entryway. And I wonder what this was actually made of. And of course, there's no surprise that this building is no longer around for us to actually look at. And of course, New Zealand has no shortage of asylums, and I thought we'd just look at a few of them and ponder the whole concept of asylums in New Zealand as well. So this is Sunnyside Asylum. The interesting thing is suddenly seeing these asylums in a very small nation, and the population of New Zealand was not even over 1 million by 1901, or so we're told. And also of note, the population of Wellington was not over 25,000 in 1901 either. So a capital city that's relatively small from a population standpoint, yet still able to erect the amazing structures that we just looked at. And now I'm also wondering, looking at some of these asylums, what was their role in New Zealand? And this is the Purora Psychiatric Hospital, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and I'm probably not. But just another gorgeous asylum. And remember, this is a nation with a shortened history. This wasn't a nation that started the Kirkbride Plan in the 1840s. This was a nation that was being settled in the 1840s by the very first people who were there. And yet there's no shortage of asylums across New Zealand, even for the smaller population. So once again, these are additional clues when taken in totality of everything that we're looking at. And it again raises more questions about what these buildings were really used for and what was really going on there. And you can see that they have the same beauty and ornate detail of the asylums we looked at in the United States as part of the Kirkbride Plan. And this is the Seacliff Lunatic Asylum. So again, the same variety of names, and yet it seems as though they follow that same path with having some sort of central tower. And I mean, look at this. 4 floors, I would say? 3-4 floors? So how many people did they have that they were sending to asylums in their smaller population? And what was really going on? It's a scary thought. Well, let's return to building explorations now that we've examined this. And of course, let's begin with nothing less than the Wellington Post Office. This is a photo from 1901. Couldn't exactly find a construction date from this post office, although if I'll go with other narratives, I'll say sometime in the 1880s. Who knows what the real date is? Naturally, they give us a very beautiful post office in 1901 Wellington. The other thing that strikes me, though, is look just how well laid out the city is, and especially in the structures and the buildings in the background. And then you contrast that with the beautiful clock tower in the post office. 3 whole floors. And keep in mind, in 1901, we're told the population of Wellington was not over 25,000. I've got some conflicting accounts on what it really was, but Imagine for a city of less than 25,000 having an ornate and beautiful post office like that. One is left to wonder as to what the possibilities could really be if we could just slam up a post office like that for a small city. Well, New Zealand could do it. All right, and now we move on to our municipal buildings, and this is Wellington Town Hall, built from 1900 to 1904. And here we see the hallmarks of our traditional government building with the large and tall, beautiful clock tower, the various pediments on it. So we can see that New Zealand was definitely followers of employing the Greco-Roman to show democracy. Although I guess they didn't need domes because they weren't hammering democracy as hard as they were in the United States. Look at that beautiful clock tower. And seeing the scaling again in the columns, and yet some of the ornate detail, and of course a classic pediment there, where you've got, looks like 6 columns right there in a row, and then you also have the classic columns built into the wall. Gorgeous building. Incredible construction, and yet it looks like you see the little window slits down there in the ground. Why would they build a building like that? I don't know. Again, it's another building that I wonder what's the underground look like, and is there a tunnel system with it? Here are the schematic plans for the building that I could find. Yes, one single view, and that's all you need. You can build a building off of that, just like many of the plans that we see in the United States. In 1900 to 1904. Again, something else built for a city with a population that did not exceed 25,000. And probably wasn't anywhere close to that at that time. But who knows what the ground truth reality is. Oh, they also had a grand organ in that town hall because, well, why not? You'd have a grand organ in there. And I wonder what purpose that served. And I wonder what purpose the building originally served if it was indeed part of a prior civilization. It's intriguing looking at Wellington because we can see that the historical narrative seems to be a lot shorter. And there seems to have been a lot more of a deliberate effort to conceal it, and it's been much more recent. That could be wrong, though. And now we're going to look at a series of hospitals in Wellington, and here this is another theme that we've seen before with many of the cities looking across the United States, where we have all these very large and beautiful compounds. And some are designated hospitals, some are designated children's hospitals, and then of course we have our slew of mental asylums all over the place. And this is a beautiful one. I like this picture of the nurse right here because it gives you an idea of the construction with the brick, and you look down at the base as well. And it's interesting because construction dates on a lot of these buildings are very difficult to ascertain, and you'll get conflicting accounts as well. Some in the 1890s, many from 1900 to 1920. And this is just a beautiful one. And you look at the solid construction within this hospital. Why would you need to build a hospital that well? I mean, I'm not complaining. If you're going to be in a hospital, it may as well be a very nice, beautiful building. Looks like it's 2 floors. And we'll take a closer look at this one because look at that. Just some of the block work in that just to build a hospital. And a beautiful fountain. Now, not to say that I would ever want to be at a hospital for any reason, but if I had to be at a hospital, I'd have to say that I would prefer to be in a hospital that looked like this. This might actually help inspire me, and it might actually help me to feel better. So perhaps whoever was really making the decisions for New Zealand had a little bit more of an altruistic motive, maybe, that they really wanted to help people recover. I'm not sure, but it is rather inspiring to think of it. Well, regardless, let's go on to the next one. And now we'll see our example of the children's hospital. And it goes down to that same old theme of having these large compounds, these very large buildings, and then, of course, seeing how they were designated. And, of course, we see the recurring theme. Okay, once you've got your municipal buildings, your government buildings out of the way, then you've got your churches. Now we've got to find all the extra buildings, and we end up with a lot of hospitals, a lot of asylums, a lot of forums for this and that. United States, we got our armories, and don't forget the opera houses. And look at this hospital. And this was apparently one that stood for quite some time and was only torn down rather recently. I believe a couple decades ago, if I go off of the account that I read. But look at the pediments there, and again, the columns being built in the wall. It's very beautiful. And this is not a design that we see too often. Certainly the pediments, yes, but I like the alteration in the color from the brick from the original base stone. It gives it a little bit of a unique, ornate beauty to it. And look at the little poles out in front. Very interesting. And here's an older picture of it. And here you can see that it still had the same beauty even in the earlier 20th century. And of course, I've glossed over the roads a little bit, but you do see the same factor in the older pictures with the roads being covered with mud. You see a lot of power lines. A lot more questions than answers when you consider the fact that this is a city on a very compressed timeline. And of course, they have to try to explain it. And I guess this is the best that they could do with the timeline that they had. Well, unfortunately for the hospital, this is all that remains of the old hospital. I guess at least they decided to leave the entryway up, and we put a lovely brutalist architecture hospital up next to it for our modern people. Yeah, I've got to say, if I was in New Zealand, I certainly wouldn't want to be in that hospital for any reason. Probably wouldn't mind looking at that arch, though, or what remains of the old hospital, and to get an idea of what material it is. And, they left it up, so obviously it was still structurally intact, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. Why does this story get repeated so many times? Really have to lament it as I go into these explorations. And then here I had conflicting accounts on this, if this was another separate hospital or if this was a children's hospital. But again, another amazing building. Looks like it's about 4 stories. And who knows, maybe more. Again, wondering on the foundation and how far underground it goes. But you see a couple towers, and these are the same kind of random buildings you'll see spread across all over the land and given numerous designations, whether it's a hospital, it's a children's hospital, or it's some other place for people to go convalesce for a while as they have to leave the stresses of life of the late 19th, early 20th century. Very, very beautiful. So many incredible things to see in New Zealand, it seems. And of course, we have to take a look at our patented church, and here we have Sacred Heart Cathedral. And there's an interesting account with this where it says that Sacred Heart was founded in 1850 and then founded again in 1901. So make of that what you will. Roman Catholic Church, or Catholic Church, but I'll just say Roman Catholic because I see columns and I see a pediment on a Catholic church. So I guess that's why that Catholic thing works so well. Even in New Zealand, just as well as it works in the United States. Beautiful building, and once again we've got our 6-column design there in the front. And we do wonder on the origin of this building. Of course, when we look at an older picture of it, we see it looked a little different with some very beautiful bell towers that were also originally on it. Quite a gorgeous building, and look at that processional there. It's really unique when you consider the way that Wellington is laid out, and you have a beautiful building like this that we're told was constructed at the very start of the 20th century, although who knows really, because when we have these stories of buildings, especially churches or government buildings, being in the same location over and over again, it raises more questions than it answers, especially a gorgeous cathedral like this, although this was apparently a basilica that got promoted to cathedral. Make of that what you will. And then looking at an old interior picture, look at the ceiling on that. And then, of course, the center of the cathedral. Gorgeous detail on it, and you can see that this is no slouch. And remember, once again, this is for a city of under 25,000 people when this was approved and built supposedly by the Catholic Church with their funds. It's just something to keep into consideration. The compressed timeline makes Wellington, New Zealand very intriguing, and it's no exception for the Sacred Heart Cathedral Church. And let's take a closer look at one of those columns. And look at how well that stood the test of time. And who knows how long that's really been there and what forces that's been subjected to over time. But just imagine having that kind of construction that would stand up that well for that long. You can walk in any new housing development and you can see new houses that haven't been up for 10 years that are already starting to fall apart. Yes, I know. We don't put the same effort into building because we don't have the artisans and the craftsmen, and I'm sure that was the same story in New Zealand, even if they're much smaller population. They just had artisans and craftsmen who were just wandering all over the place. And, well, we need you to build a church in Wellington, and the Catholic Church is going to provide unlimited money, so here you go. Here's another view of it where you can see some of the windows and detailing on it. Yep. Just built right into the hill like that. Yes, there's nothing strange about that when we see the old hill build. And you see it in so many places, too. It's something else that stands out. I mean, why wouldn't you just build a building into a hill if you think about it? Just imagine talking to the architect about that. New Zealand's version of E. Townsend Mix. Mr. Mix, yep, we got another one we're going to build in the hill. Perfect. Just the way the Catholics like it, and I can increase the charges. Yeah, imagine that. Somehow I just don't buy that explanation. And then last but not least, we'll just look at a renovation photo. But if we really think about this and apply some more devious aspects to it, imagine if someone's shown this photo 50 years from now. Look.
And we saved the best for last for our
proof
exploration of Wellington, New Zealand, and that is when they decided to have
church
the New
was
Zealand
built
Centennial
back in
exhibition.
2023.
And apparently
Or
they were
maybe
set up
they'll
and
change the
ready to go
dating
for that
system and they'll say
1939,
that it
and
was
then it
built
occurred in
in
1944.
Now, I know
New
this is a
year
little
or
different from
in
what we
current
think
year,
of as
or
most
whatever
of
dating
our
system
powerful
exhibitions occurring
Anyway,
in
it's just a
the rest of the
frightening
world
thought to
from
think of.
1850 to
Very
about
beautiful buildings in
1905,
Wellington. There's
1906.
6.
No exception.
We had a couple others that we have interest in, although really the last one being the one in San Francisco. However, this one did occur in 1940, and you ask, well, why would it have occurred so late? Perhaps it's because the cover-up, or what they were trying to achieve in Wellington, New Zealand, just simply happened later because of a different timeline, a different portion of the narrative being expressed. And yet, isn't it interesting, despite the different timeline, that we still see the same steps being followed? Settlement, historical account, dealing with the indigenous people, and then, of course, it always seems to culminate with some natural disasters, some rebuildings, and then at some point in time, we have an exhibition. And this one was no slouch, and they just seemed to build this massive structure out of nowhere in a short amount of time with a beautiful tower that was, I believe, over 150 feet tall. And what it was made out of, or anything like that. I mean, remember, this is 1940, and yet this looks very futuristic. So I'm wondering about what the reality of this building truly was. Was this something else that they were simply trying to repurpose and use? Was this something that they actually built? It's hard to say. And if this was something they actually built and just did it with wood and stucco and temporary materials, as we're always told with every single exhibition and explanation, one wonders why they don't do that today. Are they going to do something similar for the bicentennial in 2040? Well, we'll be around for that, so maybe the channel will have to come back for that at that time. Maybe I'll just actually have to go down to New Zealand and Wellington and see if they do hold such a bicentennial. Look at that structure. And look at some of the ornaments and the lights around it. Very gorgeous and very futuristic appearing. And again, this is 1940. This is before World War II. And keep in mind, we were also told about how New Zealand was suffering from the grip of the Great Depression, much like the rest of the world. But I suppose that much like the rest of the world during the Great Depression, while every other facet of New Zealand society was decimated, the government had plenty of time and resources to do what it wanted. And look at that beautiful tower. That's something that just really stands out in the way that it illuminates both the sky and the gorgeous ornamentation within it. And this is something else that does not look like brutalist architecture. This is something that seems more inspired, which is why I wonder what the reality on this is. And I really wish I could have gotten on the ground with it. And I'm sure we're given the same old story about how it was torn down because it was temporary. And here's the overall compound about it. And a very, very beautiful overall compound. And look how it's built up with the city like that. And once again, it calls back to all the other World's Fairs and exhibitions that we've taken a look at in other explorations. And we see the same layout. And I think this is a really interesting clue when it comes to considering how Wellington fits into the overall narrative with the way the lands were redesignated. And here's another image of it, and yet you have a different view of the tower with this beautiful statue in the water. All these indications of statues in water. And I won't keep you in suspense any longer. The official story that we're given is that all these buildings were used to store wool during World War II, and then they burned down in 1946. Yes, the same old story that we see with all the other exhibitions. So once again, nothing to see here. This just all burned down. I guess the little light towers burned down too. Maybe they wrapped wool around them. I don't know. It's really a tragedy when you think about it, and it's the same old story that we hear time and time again. What are your thoughts on Wellington and how it fits into the overall narrative? It's been a very enjoyable exploration, and it's a very beautiful city, and I would certainly love to go see it in person and see what it looks like today. But share your thoughts in the comments, please. Consider joining the channel as a member. You can be an explorer and receive early access to content, or you can be a Prime Explorer and have exclusive content that you can't watch on the regular channel. As always, ask questions, explore yourself, and you'll restore the world. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for joining me today.